Welcome to Asbury United Methodist Church. My name is Peter. And as we start today's lesson, let's look at the circle of the church year. This is the 24th Sunday after Pentecost, and we only have one more Sunday left, which will be the following week in ordinary time before we begin the season of Advent. So we are very, very close. And this past week, while the weather was still very nice, actually we were in the 70s, and we should normally be like in the 50s. So it was a great week to get outside, to do things in the yard, or just take walks, and just enjoy nature as a whole. So let's bow our heads and have a prayer before we begin. Dear God, we thank you for the gift of these days. We thank you for the warmth of the sun. We thank you for the coolness of the breeze. We thank you for the time that we can be outside to see your glory in the leaves and the people that we meet. Be with us this day and always. Amen. And today's godly play lesson is called The Exile and the Return. This is the desert. The desert is a dangerous place, for there is no food and there is no water in the desert. People can die in the desert, and when the wind blows, the shape of the desert changes, and people can get lost, and some will lose their way. And the sun is so hot that people wear many clothes to keep the sun from burning their skin. And when the wind blows, the sand stings your face and it stings your hands. And people need protection from the blowing sand. And at night it is cold, very cold, and you need many clothes to keep warm. The desert is a dangerous place. People do not go to the desert unless they have to. This is Jerusalem. Here is the wall. That surrounds the city of Jerusalem. And inside is the temple built for God. And here are the people of God. And the people of God knew that God was in the temple, but they also thought it was the only place where they could pray to God. And so the people thought that the wall of the city would protect them from everything. But then the Assyrians came, and they attacked the city. And it was a terrible time. People fought, some starved to death, and many died in the battles. But finally the Assyrians went away. However, then the Babylonians came, and they did not go away. Their king wanted the city of Jerusalem for himself. So they broke down the walls and burned the temple to the ground. And they took many of the people away. And only a few remained. And the soldiers marched the people of God away from Jerusalem. And they looked back at the smoke of the burning city and wondered if they would ever see Jerusalem again. And as they walked through the desert, they had to get up when the soldiers said to get up. They had to eat what the soldiers told them to eat. They had to go where the soldiers told them to go. They had to do everything the soldiers said. And they grew weary, and some died along the way. They walked past the city of Haran and continued their journey. And the people walked along the Euphrates toward Babylon. And the people of God were in exile. For they could not go home. And when they came to Babylon, they hung their harps on the weeping willow trees and sang sad songs. And they dreamed of Jerusalem and the temple, but they could not go back. And they even faced Jerusalem. When they said their prayers, slowly God's people began to understand that God was in this place too. God's presence came to them as they gathered to read the scriptures, to tell the old stories, and to pray. Now the king of Babylon allowed many of God's people to work. They set up little stores, and some worked for the king. And it was a shock when the king of Persia came with his army and took Babylon for himself. But this new king of Persia began to let some of the people go back to Jerusalem. Some went with the prophet Ezra. And when they returned, they began to rebuild the temple. Then more were allowed to go back, and they went with the prophet Nehemiah. And they rebuilt the walls around the city. And the people of God were no longer in exile. They could go home again. But do you know what happened? Not all of them went home. For now they knew that God was in the strange and foreign land too. So some stayed because God was there also. Now I wonder, what part of the story you like best? I wonder, what part is the most important? I wonder where you are in the story, or what part of the story relates to you. I wonder if there's any part of the story we could leave out and still have all the story we need. I wonder where you have been this past week with God and how God has been with you. Maybe you can draw a picture, write a poem, write a story, write a song. Or maybe just go outside and feel God's presence in the world. And until we meet again, may the peace of God be with you. Amen.